Good evening. On the eve of the launch of the Conservative election campaign, a member of Boris Johnson's cabinet, Alun Cairns, the Welsh Secretary, has been urged to resign by a victim of rape. The victim, who can't be named, says Mr Cairns should step down because of his links to a man who sabotaged her trial. Ross England, who served as an aide to the Welsh Secretary, was heavily criticised by a judge for his role in wrecking the trial last year. Mr England was subsequently selected as a Conservative candidate for the Welsh Assembly. Mr Cairns had denied knowledge of the events, but BBC News has seen an email sent to him mentioning the issue. Our Wales political editor Felicity Evans has the story.
Alun Cairns arriving at the last cabinet meeting before the election just hours before he'd face calls for his resignation. He's been under pressure over what he knew about this man, Ross England, a former aide who was a witness in a rape trial in April last year. Mr England's evidence caused the trial to collapse. The judge, Stephen Hopkins QC, told him, "You have managed single-handed, and I have no doubt it was deliberate on your part, to sabotage this trial. Get out of my court." 8 months later, the Conservative Party in Wales selected Ross England as a candidate for the Welsh Assembly elections in 2021. Alun Cairns endorsed him as a friend and colleague. Last week, when his role in the collapse of the trial came to light, the party suspended Ross England. And Alun Cairns said he became aware of the collapse of the trial some considerable time afterwards and had no knowledge of the role of Ross England. But it's emerged that last summer Mr Cairns' special advisor sent him an email which said, "I have spoken to Ross and he is confident no action will be taken by the court."
How do you think we can best do that?
That was 4 months before Mr Cairns endorsed him as a candidate. Alun Cairns hasn't given an interview or a statement today, but the Conservative Party in Wales has issued a statement. They said there is no new information in this leaked document confirming an informal conversation which took place a considerable time after the trial collapsed and is consistent with statements made. But the woman who was raped has called on Mr Cairns to step down. She told us, if he'd come out and condemned Ross in the first instance, he wouldn't be in this position. I can't believe that not one senior Welsh Conservative has said that what he did was wrong. Speaking last week, she spoke of her anger that the party had selected Mr England as a candidate.
For them to make them a candidate in a target seat for the Welsh Assembly proves to me how little respect they have for me, how little respect they have for the criminal justice system. Why would you not just give the victim a fair chance of actually justice to prevail? Why wouldn't you just let a jury decide on the facts?
With a general election underway, Mr Cairns' political opponents are echoing calls for his resignation.
It's time for Alun Cairns to look at his position and to think about whether he should step down now for the sake of the country and for the sake of his party.
But senior Conservatives are trying not to get drawn in.
The person who was involved has been suspended. Alun is a fantastic Secretary of State, deeply respected and effective. I don't have the full details on this. Obviously, it's a very, very sensitive issue. I don't want to speculate.
For the moment, Mr Cairns is digging in. But with a campaign launch tomorrow, the party will want this row settled, and fast. Felicity Evans, BBC News.
Well, that was the report by Felicity. Let's go live to the Senedd in Cardiff Bay. Felicity is there for us tonight. You've been talking to Welsh Conservatives throughout the day, Felicity, about Mr Cairns' position. What are they telling you?
Well, no one willing to go on the record, Huw, but off the record, a great deal of concern. The Conservatives, of course, optimistic of their chances in this campaign. They're particularly hoping to take seats in the northeast of Wales. But one source said earlier the toxic nature of these revelations could bring down the whole Conservative campaign in Wales. And another senior party figure said of Mr Cairns, "I personally think he's in serious trouble." Tonight, another said there was increasing anger and alarm amongst election candidates as this story has unfolded. He added, "It looks very difficult to see how Alun Cairns can lead the campaign in Wales without fully explaining the circumstances of this case." And another source just commenting, saying, "Our three priorities in the national campaign outside of Brexit are law and order, the NHS and schools. He is undermining one of those. There is no doubt that tonight Alun Cairns is facing increasing pressure, including from within his own party here in Wales, to explain exactly how much he knew about Ross England's involvement in the collapse of that trial, and perhaps most importantly of all, Huw, when he knew it.
Felicity, once again, thanks very much. Felicity Evans there for us, our political editor in Wales. Well, in another development today involving a cabinet minister, the leader of the Commons, Rees-Mogg, has apologised after suggesting that people living in Grenfell Tower might have used common sense on the night of the fire 2 years ago and left the tower block despite the fire brigade's advice to stay in the building until help arrived. 72 people died in the fire in the summer of 2017. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has the story.
If there's one tragedy it's easy to show sympathy with and be sensitive about, it's Grenfell. The inquiry finding just last week residents shouldn't have been told to stay put in their flats for so long. Yet one government minister has managed to upset the survivors.
The more one's read over the weekend about the report and about the chances of people surviving, if you just ignore what you're told and leave, you are so much safer. And I think if either of us were in a fire, whatever the fire brigade said, we would leave the burning building. It just seems the common sense thing to do.
Marcio Gomez, his pregnant wife and 2 daughters were trapped on the 21st floor. They filmed the smoke and the darkness that made it almost impossible to escape. Their son Logan was stillborn after the fire.
There's no way you can get out, floor 21.
There's no way. We've tried 3 times already. Five it.
You know, I lost my son, and yeah, it was hurtful. It's not very nice for the survivors, the families, or even the community as well, what he said. He certainly needs to start thinking a bit more about what he's saying, you know, and if he wants to talk about common sense, then I can quite, you know, turn around and say it's common sense not to build houses or flats with flammable material.
As he left cabinet, Mr Rees-Mogg was asked if he thought Grenfell residents lacked common sense.
That's not what I said.
Do you regret your comments?
That's not what I said.
He later said, "I profoundly apologise. What I meant to say is that I would have also listened to the fire brigade's advice to stay and wait at the time. However, with what we know now and with hindsight, I wouldn't, and I don't think anyone else would. I would hate to upset the people of Grenfell if I was unclear in my comments."
Do you accept his apology for those comments?
No, not really. I think it was just very insensitive. It shows that how out of touch he is with everyone.
At any time, Rees-Mogg's comments would be seen as insensitive, but at the start of an election campaign, they suggest a government minister lacking empathy at the very time politicians are trying to connect with people. Grenfell survivors again feeling let down by those in charge. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Now, the Liberal Democrats have launched their election campaign, claiming that they're the only party with a clear-cut promise to stop Brexit. Party leader Jo Swinson said that this election could bring about a seismic change, as she put it, in British politics, and that the economy would benefit from a so-called Remain bonus, an extra £50 billion to spend on public services over the next 5 years. Brexit was also a prominent feature of both Labour and Conservative campaigns today, as our political editor Laura Kuenssberg reports, and there are some flashing images coming up.
Our Liberal Democrat candidate for Prime Minister, Jo Swinson.
A Liberal Democrat candidate for Prime Minister? Could Jo Swinson really transform a dozen from 2017 into a group who could govern?
This is not a normal election. It's not a typical choice about whether you want the red team or the blue team to be in government.
Her ranks have grown as Brexit has rippled through the 2 big parties. But as a tribe who unashamedly wants to keep us in the EU, the Lib Dems believe their best chance is now.
I never thought that I would stand here and say that I'm a candidate to be Prime Minister. But when I look at Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, I am absolutely certain I could do a better job than either of them.
Honest whispers suggest number 10 is out of reach. So if no one got a majority, would she, could she, prop up one of the others?
I am absolutely categorically ruling out Liberal Democrat votes putting Jeremy Corbyn into number 10.
You said this morning you want to bring the country together, but how would you do that if your plan is to disregard the vote of millions of people in the referendum of 2016?
As Liberal Democrats, we're standing up for what we believe in and being very honest and straightforward about that. I recognise there are differences of opinion on this issue.
It's a new politics now, and I do think they really have a chance to form a government.
Very optimistic, and it's a really good feeling actually, going out on the doorstep, very, very positive feedback.
If you get more than 50 to 80 plus, I'll be happy with that.
Labour will come knocking with a different proposal for Brexit. After months of internal agonies, they're suggesting if they win, they'd negotiate a different deal with Brussels and then, within 6 months, give you another choice of leaving or staying in.
A Labour government will get Brexit sorted within 6 months. It won't be a rerun of 2016. This time, the choice will be between leaving with a sensible deal or remaining in the EU. That is the policy. It really isn't very complicated.
Believe it or not, the official campaign hasn't started, but we're speeding through those Kodak moments already. The SNP refrain, familiar too.
This is an election about who decides the future of Scotland. If we allow Westminster to do that, we risk being taken out of the EU against our will.
Of course, more than a third of people in Scotland did vote to leave. And he's sent everyone to the polls because it hasn't happened yet.
Do you feel up for the campaign and the
Yeah.
I think you do. You look as though you're full of beans.
Will you be back as a government health secretary?
However bouncy any of our politicians appear now,
Morning, Secretary of State.
some of them have chosen this to be their last day. For those who want to stay, this election is a gamble that the grins can't hide.
Laura's here now. Laura, the campaign now moving up a few gears. From today's evidence, what are we looking forward to?
Well, Boris Johnson hasn't even gone through the formal ceremonials. He will go officially to Buckingham Palace tomorrow to talk to the Queen for the actual monarch's rubber stamp that this election campaign will be underway. But already there's been a very tricky day for the Conservatives. Not just calls for a serving cabinet minister to quit and stand down, but also, I think, a really toxic reminder for the Conservatives after Jacob Rees-Mogg's remarks about the tragedy at Grenfell Tower. He has clearly apologised very sincerely. But it's an absolute reminder for the Conservatives of how vulnerable they are to the charge made repeatedly by their critics that in some ways they just don't relate to millions of ordinary people who find life difficult, who struggle to get by, who live vulnerable lives. And that is something Conservatives, wise Conservatives, are absolutely aware of. But what we saw today, of course, gives all sorts of fodder for their critics in the other party to throw at them repeatedly through this campaign and already spreading all over the place online. And it's also a reminder to all of the parties, whether it's the Lib Dems today wanting to talk only about stopping Brexit or Labour wanting to push their policies. Try as they might, they do not control the agenda of the issues that will pop up. But in the end, however bumpy and however varied this campaign is, in 6 weeks' time, the outcome will determine one huge thing. If the Conservatives get a majority, we will leave the European Union maybe in a matter of weeks at the beginning of next year. And if they don't, well, we may well be on the path to another referendum. And that is why people talk correctly of this election being one of the most vital in modern times.
Laura, once again, thanks very much. Laura Kuenssberg there, our political editor with the latest analysis. Let's stay with politics because the former Conservative Chancellor, Philip Hammond, says he will leave Parliament with great sadness after deciding not to stand as an independent candidate in his Surrey constituency. Mr Hammond lost the Conservative whip after defying Boris Johnson over plans for a no-deal Brexit. He said he wouldn't run as an independent as that would be a direct challenge to the party that he loved. Now, the outgoing head of the European Commission, JeanClaude Juncker, has told the BBC that he believes the UK will leave the EU by the end of January, the end of the current extension period. Mr Juncker admitted he regretted not speaking out at the time of the European referendum in 2016. So our Europe editor, Katya Adler, has put to him some of the promises made by the parties in the run-up to this election to see what his reaction was.
If we start with Boris Johnson, because he's still
I like
Prime Minister.
him, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he says if he wins the election and the withdrawal bill is passed, then he thinks it's possible to get a new trade deal negotiated by the end of 2020. So, you know, in less than 12 months. Is that possible?
I don't want to be a prisoner of this time framework.
But is it even possible? It took 7 years to negotiate a deal with Canada, for example.
It takes time to negotiate a free trade agreement.
See.
Sometimes I have the impression that in Britain, people, parliamentary representatives, governmental representatives, do think that this is an easy thing to be done. It's not easy, because we are negotiating for years with Canada. It will take time.
Can I have a look at now some other claims being made? So the Labour Party, for example, says if it wins the general election, it will renegotiate once again, so a third Brexit deal.
I will no longer be in office when this happens. And so it will be up to the next Commission to decide if yes or no there is room of manoeuvre for a new deal or a new treaty. Honestly spoken, I don't think that this is a realistic approach.
Would you like there to be another referendum and the UK to give Brexit another thought?
The question if yes or no there should be a second referendum is an inner British issue. I don't think that there will be a second referendum.
The Brexit Party says that the new Brexit, the withdrawal agreement, is not Brexit. They say it's just not Brexit, it's Brexit in name only. Is that a fair thing to say about Boris Johnson's deal with your Commission?
No, it's Brexit. I'm not a supporter of Mr Farage.
You made a bet at the time of the referendum with the UK Commissioner, and you pointed out that you thought that Remain would lose the referendum. You bet him £1. So just going back to the 31st of January, this latest Brexit extension, would you bet the £1 that the UK will be out by the 31st of January? No more Brexit extensions,
I do think that it will happen, but this is a too long story. It has to be brought to an end.
You know, you've been in this job for a long time. Would you be tempted to stay in your office until Brexit is done, or at least this phase of Brexit?
No. I had Brexit enough in my life.
President Juncker, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
And that was the outgoing head of the European Commission, JeanClaude Juncker, talking to my colleague, our Europe editor, Katya Adler. Now, thousands of scientists from around the world have joined forces to declare a global climate emergency. They say that without deep and lasting change, the world is facing untold human suffering and that governments are failing to address the crisis. So how important will the issue of climate change be in this UK election? And what can the next government hope to do about it? Our Science Editor David Shukman has this report.
With a new series, David Attenborough is once again attracting huge audiences, with revelations about the natural world. Climate change now has a profile like never before. So do people care about it? Protests by Extinction Rebellion were annoying for some, but inspiring for many others. And the school strikes showed a growing concern that's reflected in some opinion polls.
The environment is of particular concern to younger voters. In fact, in our most recent poll, it was seen as being the second most important issue to these voters, second only to the issue of Brexit. And I think over this election campaign, politicians are going to have to start discussing the issue of the environment if they want to win over the support of those youngest voters.
So what needs to be done? This solar farm in Sussex is one relatively small part of the answer, as the UK tries to go low carbon and no longer add to the rise in temperatures. All the main parties have committed to tackling climate change more or less rapidly, so whoever ends up in charge faces a monumental challenge, and not just overseeing many more of these, but also wind energy, thousands more turbines out at sea and maybe on the land as well. Greening our homes, moving away from gas as the main source of heat, and cleaning up how we get around, ditching diesel and petrol. It's a huge task. But is this transformation possible? The modern British economy was founded on carbon, burning fossil fuels. Changing that will touch every aspect of our lives. But the government's climate advisors say that must be attempted.
When we think about the things that need to be done to get to that goal of net zero emissions, it's absolutely enormous. It involves things in every sector of the economy, and of course we need government policies in every sector of the economy to deliver that. And we will need to see in the manifestos that come forth in the next election whether those policy commitments are there. It's essential that they are.
This comes as we hear that the past month was the hottest October ever recorded, and as 11,000 scientists have banded together to warn that we're facing a climate emergency, and that the world has so far failed to respond. David Shukman, BBC News.
And throughout the election campaign, BBC Reality Check and the team will be checking facts about the party's claims, looking at whether the data backs them up, and you can find more details at bbc.co.uk/news or on the BBC News app.